current nomenclature, which seems to be accessory dwelling unit versus accessory apartments, although there are probably 1/3 of the towns on the Cape refer to them as accessory apartments, and the rest refer to them as accessory dwelling units. The only other thing I'd like to bring up that's not in the memo is on page 1, having to do with the washer and dryer on site. This was put in based on a comment from Mary Wagon. And I sent her an email about that saying I didn't want to add any additional regulations to this unless we had to. It's really a plumbing code, and I think from talking with Mark is that maybe we just take it out of the zoning bylaw and let it sit in the plumbing code, because we're referencing you also have to meet the plumbing code versus this being some other requirement for people in the zoning bylaw.
It also references a common area as well.
Right.
In the main house, but I would think, there would be some of these units that would be constructed, and then you'd have the ability to put a washer dryer hookup in the accessory dwelling.
Right.
How would you feel if someone came into your house on a weekly basis to do their washing? Think about it.
Yeah, I wouldn't like it.
So that's my point. So I'm thinking if you want to have more discussion on that, or just leave it relative to zoning, plumbing.
So I'm sorry, are you advocating for leaving it in or
Taking it out.
Taking it out, okay, I'm sorry.
Any other comments from the board relative to the washer dryer?
If I could, I think the plumbing code and the sanitary code are pretty clear about it. There's no need to add any further restrictions to it. If somebody goes into it knowing that they don't have a washer and dryer, but they do have access someplace else, maybe not in the home, but at least to a laundromat somewhere, then that's fine, as far as I was concerned.
Every dwelling unit is required to have a connection.
Doesn't mean you have to have the washer dryer in it, you just need a connection? So take,
I'd suggest we strike that number 2.
okay.
Any other comments? I guess we're good.
So everyone was okay with everything that's highlighted in yellow and moving forward with that? So good with the yellow, and I'll take out number 2. This might go quickly, I don't know. I'm sorry, are you interested in the packet that we're looking at? Okay, sure. I'm sorry.
Sorry I'm late.
And what's your name?
Christina Demetria.
Okay, nice to meet you. Kathy Williams. So the next one has to do with the signage, and I think basically at the last meeting, all we did was talk about taking out the color for the LED lighting and letting it be generic and be at the applicant's preference. Well,
Talk about accessory dwelling units?
we just did.
We just did.
I'm sorry, I was here for that.
Oh,
Okay. Would you come up to the table, please?
Here.
Yes, give us your name and your comments as well. Thank you.
My name is Christina Demetria. I became a full-time resident nearly 4 years ago in South Yarmouth. I feel blessed to be a part of this wonderful community. I am mother of 4 grown sons and recently became a grandmother. My work has always been an advocate of housing for all. I am here today because I am concerned for our younger generation, those who have recently graduated or become new parents or want to better our community, but cannot afford to buy a home here on the Cape. I am also concerned for the older generation. That would be me. Those who are about to retire or have retired that may not be able to afford to stay in their homes. We all know that there is a shortage statewide of housing. Given the prices of a medium home, rental units, I believe, will become a wave of the future. Instead of building rental units on our beautiful green spaces, why not repurpose our existing dwellings, such as basements, garages, or barns, into 1 or 2 bedroom units? And why not make the process easier on those homeowners to ensure an efficient process? And while we are at it, this proposal will not affect taxpayers' dollars, but instead provide added income. Whether it be a 1-month lease or a 12-month lease with a separate entrance, I believe that this could be a win-win situation. I am here to respectfully ask the board to allow more conversations in the weeks and months to come about this proposal. Thank you.
Well, I would just like to answer a couple of your comments. We've been dealing with the accessory units, apartments, for the past several months, and we realized that there was an issue with affordable units relative to restrictions, and we also realized that there were issues with the family-related apartment. So under the affordable guideline, what we did was eliminate the restrictions. So that being said, I think that the homeowner, landowner would be a lot more comfortable renting to an affordable entity. In regards to family-related, we thought about creating other entities that would be a caregiver to a specific member of the family.
Yeah.
Husband or wife that needs additional services, medically speaking, friends, longtime friends, and what have you. So we've broadened the situation relative to people who could use family-related apartments.
That's great.
So I think that what we're just going to have a test series of applications coming to the ZBA, and ZBA will be looking at other entities possibly to create more affordable and family apartments.
That's great.
And we've raised the affordable rate up to, I don't know if you heard Kathy mention, it's up to 100%. You know, taking into consideration there's a debt factor there too.
Of course, yeah.
So I think that we're going to look and see how this works out. We're hoping that we're going to have more units coming forward, but it's a start.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we should also mention that the Cape Cod Commission has made this a priority as well across the Cape. And we're doing our part within the town to foster that that affordable housing is more available.
You know, I just added note.
Would you come up to the mic, please?
They can't hear you at home if you're not in the mic.
And just pull that a little closer to you.
Okay. Just an added note. I was before you here around 5 years ago when I bought a sea captain's home on Homer Ave, and I was very pleased that we came up with a good plan to do an historic restoration, and it has come out beautiful. So I applaud all that you do.
Tom, you serve on the Community Housing Committee.
Yes.
right?
Yes, and that is, Mary Wagan has been working with Kathy to update these regulations and these bylaw provisions specifically. And Mary is very satisfied that that this direction is in keeping with really moving forward with this item for the town.
Oh, that's really great. And I love being in this town. Thank you.
And I serve on the Municipal Housing Trust as well, so we're
Yeah.
conscious of
Yeah.
these units that are being created now.
Awesome.
And looking forward to bringing more on board. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Kathy?
So signage, the last thing had to do with taking out the reference to the color of the LED lights to be white, and you'll see that on page 7, crossed out and highlighted in yellow. I did talk to Mark, and he basically indicated that if it's not specifically restricted to a certain color, then it would be open to any color that the applicant wanted. I think the idea was to keep it at white, to keep it a little less busy, but the board wanted to leave it open for the applicant to decide.
Mark, I was just wondering if there's a need for multicolors. Have business owners come to you relative to wanting to use various colors? Just wondering what your thoughts are on it.
If the bylaw doesn't, excuse me, if the bylaw doesn't restrict, then they can do whatever color they want.
Yeah, I understand, but has there been comments relative from the business public in regards to what colors they would like to see, or?
No, sir, they've only been asking to use LED signs. They've not asked specific colors.
Okay.
You know, most of the ones I've seen have been red or green,
Yeah,
so.
okay, thank you. Any other comments from the board?
So we're good?
We're good.
All right. The next one is on entertainment, and there's no changes that were made on this. I just wanted to include it in the packet so you had all of the different changes that we were looking at. Basically, what it's doing is allowing, right now, if you were doing some type of outdoor entertainment at your restaurant, for example, you would need to get a special permit from the Zoning Board of Appeals, in addition to going to the Board of Selectmen for an entertainment license. This is basically taking that out of the zoning bylaw and saying it's allowed in the zoning bylaw as long as you are getting that entertainment license through the Board of Selectmen. And then the second part of that is basically modifying the definition for temporary outdoor recreation to be in line with the definition that we're looking at from the Drive-In Site Utilization Committee for the former drive-in site. And it was a pretty good definition, so we thought maybe it would be more applicable to kind of put it in here and blend it. I don't think anybody had any comments on that, but I just wanted to give a quick overview. The next one on board was stormwater. Again, no changes have been made to this section. All it's doing is referencing a new stormwater regulation section that's referencing the Town of Yarmouth stormwater management regulations, which people need to adhere to anyway. And then it's also referencing that new section on Section 304 stormwater management in a couple other places in the zoning bylaw. We're still looking at maybe some other type of stormwater changes in order to meet the MS4, but that would be done through the stormwater management regulations, and that would be done through a public hearing with the Conservation Commission and with input, I'm sure, from the Planning Board.
I have two questions. All applicable projects, that's pretty vague. It's pretty wide open.
The applicable is defined in the Yarmouth stormwater regulations.
And my second question is, where are those located? Where are those to be found?
They're located on the Town of Yarmouth website, if you're looking for them. Basically, right now, they only apply to discharges to a wetland resource and/or discharges that go into a town-owned municipal system, which then discharges into a wetland resource and just disturbs a certain area. I think those regulations have been in place for well over a decade, and I don't believe they've issued any permits on it because the applicability hasn't been hit. So we need to modify it a little bit to make sure that we're meeting the MS4 requirements, which basically requires that a stormwater permit be issued for any project that disturbs more than an acre and discharges into the municipal system.
So this new section is comprised of just this one item, 304.1.
Correct.
It seems a little skimpy.
It doesn't give you any of the details. You're right, and I don't disagree with that.
That's right.
There was quite a bit of discussion back and forth, and I even talked to town council about whether we could do it this way. And he said, or she said, that it was fine to do it this way. I had a question because obviously if you're changing the zoning bylaw, that's 2/3 vote at town meeting versus changing the stormwater management regulations, public hearing. Different standard. So, you know, if this is something where you guys don't feel comfortable with this, this is something we can pull from this town meeting and we can look at throughout the next year, including specific stormwater regulations within the zoning bylaw. I did talk to the stormwater consultant about whether I had some concerns about this as well, about whether we should be just putting it in our zoning bylaw and then putting it in our subdivision control regulations and not having it be something separate. A lot of towns have all of their stormwater regulations contained in one document. And who's responsible for issuing the permit may be different entities. It may be the planning board for a definitive subdivision, maybe the conservation commission if it's within their resource jurisdiction, maybe it's simply the building department, depending on how the regulations are written, and it's just part of the building permit that gets issued for a particular project. So we're going back and forth on a staff level trying to figure that out. So if there's some discomfort with that, this is something that doesn't have to be done this annual town meeting, but it would definitely have to be done the next town meeting in order to meet the MS4 requirements.
Any other comments on stormwater regulations?
So are we keeping it, or is there further discussion? Do we want to keep moving forward with this?
Yeah.
See what happens at the public hearing and stuff? Make sense?
I have no problem with the language in there.
Okay.
This is annual town meeting 2020. What happened? What happened? And then our favorite one is boat storage.
Oh, my gosh.
So in talking with Mark, he didn't really have any issue with taking out in the driveway and just allowing people to store one without any restriction with regard to the location. It gives a little bit more flexibility in our seaside community as to where people can store their boats on their property, but it doesn't get it too out of hand by including all recreational vehicles. It's simply the most predominant one, which is boats.
I had a comment on the very last sentence, the way it reads, provided it does not create a traffic safety issue. I would suggest inserting traffic or fire safety. In other words, if a boat is stored on the property, will it be an impediment to the fire department to be able to
Access.
knock down a fire? So in other words, the two words, or traffic or fire safety, is a suggestion.
Thoughts?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, no problem.
I do have a question when the
Sure.
appropriate time is ready. And you may have already
Sure.
covered this in the meetings that I couldn't attend. We all know that boats are, they're pretty ubiquitous in lawns. It's like basketball hoops out in Indiana. Who has the power to remove these boats? Who's gonna go around and find out if these are registered or not registered boats? What's the, you do?
Well, the problem, what happens is, and this was explained at one of the meetings, and this is something that Mark was hoping to get included in the bylaw, is, somebody has their boat in front of their house, not behind the front face. Their neighbor doesn't like it. Maybe they're having a dispute with them on something. They know about this regulation. They call Mark. Mark has to go out or send somebody out to do an inspection. Okay, you have the boat. You ask people to move it. If they don't move it, then there's fines involved, and it can get difficult. And then that person says, well, if I have to move my boat, I know 16 other people in town who are doing the same thing, and here's the list of all of those people. Now go and do the same thing to them. It takes an enormous amount of time in the building department staff in order to be running these things down, compared to how much of a problem is it really if you had one boat on your property. The only way you would know if it's not registered or not is if somebody complained. Nobody's going to go around and particularly look, but if a neighbor says, you know what, that's an unregistered boat, and he calls, he's going to have to go and say, your bylaw allows it for one registered, and then he does it. But I would like to think that the amount of people he has that problem with is significantly smaller than the amount of people who are parking their boat in their front driveway or right off the side of their driveway, but in front of that front face.
Okay.
We're silent about violations and penalties. Is that covered somewhere else, Mark?
From the very beginning of the book.
Okay. So similar penalty?
$300 a day, each day's a new violation.
Yeah, so it's a common violation and penalty clause.
It's a zoning violation, like any violation.
Yep.
The only one different is in the sign bylaw, and there's a different set of regulations for, when we find.
So it's only through exception that we would have a different kind of...
That's the only violation difference, correct.
Okay, thanks. I did look at some others, when you give me 2 weeks, I'm aggravated.
Do you want this to go through, Joanne?
I aggravate everybody here, And interestingly, I hunted Chatham's because I go there once a week, and I travel, and I cannot find anything in their zoning bylaw that references anything about boat storage. So I'm wondering where else it might be, but anyway, there are lots of boats stored in
Marshfield.
Norwich.
Marshfield's another town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe they're silent on it. But I did find Barnstable, and Barnstable is very similar to ours, very simple, straightforward. Although they do add in, maybe you put up some shrubbery, maybe you make sure it's shrunk wrap, maybe you try to hide it. I think that's a very bad idea. But similar, everything else is relatively similar, and Harwich as well. So I don't see that we're, make it as simple as possible, and people are already doing it now. This language, I think, is fine. We could even, if we wanted, again, to keep it as simple as possible, technically, if it has documentation from the Coast Guard, that means it is registered in some way.
Yeah.
Says that?
But I'm just saying, maybe we just have registered, and we know what that means. It's registered
Yeah.
either through environmental police, or it could be out of state, a registry of motor vehicles, if it's got New Hampshire on it, or it doesn't have any registration numbers on it, but it is documented. So I think we can just have a small R, registered, and drop all the stuff about the Coast Guard.
Because I
Make it
think,
really simple.
I think you had mentioned adding that language
did.
because of
I
the
did.
larger size boats weren't registered.
Yeah,
So,
but most large boats, they do get them registered. They have to pay excise tax on them and everything. So most of the ones that I know that are pretty large.
Maybe just change the language to a valid registration,
Oh, there you
It's
go.
fine. That's perfect.
and
That's
it's
good.
done.
Yep.
That's great.
Easy read. After all, it is Cape Cod. You expect to see boats here, right?
Yeah.
right. Okay,
That's great.
that was easy.
I promise I won't look at this again.
No, you do a great job, and I appreciate you checking out other communities, because sometimes, on a staff level, we can't always get around to that, so that's excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
The next one is the VCOD building height. No changes were made to this, and this was something related to, right now, the height of the general building height, not outside of the VCOD, allows for some ancillary things to be above that height. But that was not included in the language in the VCOD, and we talked about adding it in, and that's what this language is doing here. But the board was only interested in doing it in the VC2, so that's what's shown here. I did set a maximum height of 4 feet above the maximum building height allowed for these ancillary structures, so they didn't get too crazy. And
Everyone comfortable with that?
Yep.
and then the last one is, we'll just, as a cleanup, take away the temporary moratorium on marijuana establishments, because they're banned in both the general bylaw and the use table in the zoning bylaw. I should have eliminated it before. I just forgot about it. So
Good.
the next thing on the docket here is I need to submit some placeholders for all of our zoning articles, and what we were interested in, how we were interested in potentially breaking them up. On the last page of the memo there, I have some ideas on how you might want to break it up, or whether you think certain things are going to be more contentious than others. It's probably best to have that in a separate article unto itself. If there's a bunch of things that you feel are fairly innocuous, you can lump them together and maybe some miscellaneous amendments. We typically don't have more than, I think the maximum we've had since I've been here is 7 articles, but we typically have between 4 and 6 articles.
Do you really think that we're going to have some that are contentious?
I don't think so. I think there'll be some questions on the accessory dwelling units, and I think the emphasis in the explanation is
Yeah.
this is one step to improving it and making it easier. It doesn't mean it's the end of it. The zoning bylaw is a dynamic document. Signage, you never know how signage always seems to get someone torqued up. The entertainment one, with regard to, the outdoor entertainment being just through the Board of Selectmen licensing, I don't think that will be particularly, but people may not like not having the extra protection of the ZBA if it's going to be noisy. So that's why I was kind of leaving that separate. The stormwater regulations, I think it's fairly innocuous, but it is something that's a little bit different. The boat storage, I don't know, people may love it, or people may say, no, I don't like it when my neighbor has his boat in the front yard now, so I don't want to see more boats like that.
Yeah, I guess.
I could see you combining Article 4 with 4 and 6 together,
Okay.
make that miscellaneous, because that's sort of an innocuous
I think it is.
thing that doesn't need a lot of discussion.
Sure. Does that make sense for everyone?
Yeah.
4 and 6, yeah.
And the boat storage?
I'd keep that, let it stand on its own.
What, the boat storage? Yeah, okay.
I would think that would be well-received.
I would think it would be well-received.
Yep.
So that the things that are in the miscellaneous would be the VCO building height, that revised definition for temporary outdoor recreation, getting rid of the moratorium, and then the
Yeah.
stormwater regs.
Yeah, fits the
Sounds-
bill.
That sounds great.
Any other suggestions?
Sounds good.
I don't know, you're doing a good job, Tom. Cranking right through.
Me? The other one is doing all the work as usual.
With regard to, I guess, the Cape Cod Commission stuff and the technical bulletins, they've extended the public comment period through January 13th, and they're having a public hearing on January 10th. I believe it's at 3 p.m. I think I sent you guys out that.
Did you get a chance to read the additional information that they sent you?
I have gone through half of them.
Well, I know.
But
You're working on so many other
Yeah.
things that,
No, I do plan on finishing it and submitting comments before then. I didn't have, so far in the things that I've gone through, any significant comments. I think it's more emphasizing if there's a method to meeting a goal or objective that's specifically related to the suburban commercial place type, of making sure that maybe that's as flexible and promotes redevelopment of our Route 28 section as much as possible. That's really what I've been looking at. There might be a few comments with regard to the affordable housing section. We did talk very briefly about that, I think, was it the Housing Trust meeting, Tom?
yeah,
But I didn't know whether,
trust
yeah, yeah.
and the community housing as well.
So I will probably have a few comments, but I'm not going to have, probably won't have a significant number. You're not going to really know what they mean until you have a DRI and how it's interpreted, because they'll have like a laundry list of 6 methodologies with which a project could meet a goal. Maybe 2 of those are sufficient to the commission to meet it. Maybe they want 3. It's really going to be project by project basis. And they did that to allow flexibility in the process, and hopefully it works that way.
Wasn't it Barnstable that was looking for higher thresholds?
Yes, that's something a little bit different. The RPP and the technical bulletins don't have anything to do with the threshold set for developments of regional impact. That's something that they're going to be looking at next. And I think that is something that we're probably going to want to comment on.
Yep, exactly.
I think one of the things I've gotten through this process is, if you can do something to avoid having to go through a DRI by either having, a GIZ in place, or Chapter H, or increasing the thresholds, the better off we might be for development. A lot of it is all a function of the infrastructure that you have, and it's all going to come down, I think, to wastewater and our wastewater planning and what type of capital commitments we've made to that when we start going for our next GIZ, and how we're going to change that, because we've got to show that we've been making some progress on that, and we have a capital budget for it.
Yeah, we could have a potential for a major branded hotel in one of the VCOD areas. And what would we look for relative to square footage? I mean,
Yeah.
would we start off incrementally, or would we look at the potential for, say, for example, what does the Hampton Inn have for square footage?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I know they have like 136 rooms, but I don't know what their square footage is. That's a
I
good
think we ought to
question.
keep that in mind, though,
Yeah.
moving forward,
Yep,
because ultimately, that was our goal overall.
yep, yep. Well, I think maybe, they didn't have to go through a DRI because they were in the GIZ.
Right.
So we want to maybe keep some of these, some of these motel properties still within the GIZ, but maybe we want to expand it and get rid of some of those properties and include some properties related to the BCOD. So there's some discussions on that.
Yeah, I think you're going to see, with the surge coming forward, the ability to merge a lot of these lots and make larger land areas for development, redevelopment, I should say.
That's a good point, because right now, the Title V is 10,000 gallons per day per lot. So if you're trying to combine them and have a larger project, it's going to go over that. And you have to have a wastewater treatment facility, then there's a cost of that, and it's too expensive, and you can't do the project.
Kathy, I'm not familiar with, the commercial site plan requirements, but do we have a requirement that when we have adjacent commercial properties and someone comes in and wants to develop that we can require them to connect to reduce the number of curb cuts?
If somebody, you're talking about access management, not?
Yes.
Okay. There's nothing in there right now that requires it, other than when you're going through site plan review. And certainly when you're in the VCOD, it's encouraged. Not only that, but it's also encouraged by connecting properties, parking lots in the rear, and you actually even have to show how you might either make the connection or show how you might be able to make that connection in the future.
Right.
But we could probably be stricter on access management. It just
Just
becomes...
seems like on 28 in particular, because you have all this traffic and all these turning movements and everything. I mean, if somebody's in, say, Cumberland Farms and they want to get to the adjacent property, they might have to pull out and drive down and pull back into another property. And I'm just thinking that to reduce these turning movements and reduce traffic patterns, to get them to a minimum, we should have something like that in the regulations.
It becomes a little tricky.
I know.
Because I know that people are very protective of their curb cuts, and even if you have a small lot and you have 2 curb cuts, you don't want to lose one, and even if they're 40 feet wide, you don't want to cut them down to 24 feet wide. So that it's a good thing, but it's something that we need to think about a little bit more closely. I don't know
We
how
have
that
run
goes.
into this before when we've had redevelopments come before us, and we've required them to cut down the number of curb cuts or give up a curb cut. So that's really when it comes into play. It's not, you can't really just go to somebody that has the existing curb cut and say, I'm sorry, we're taking that one away. But if they come for redevelopment of some kind, then we have the site plan review, and that's the mechanism to stop it then.
Another thing we considered when we were working on VCOD, the 4 villages, was to create interior roads
Right.
where you had specific businesses adjacent to each other, and you could pull off and you could travel down specific areas relative to the business you wanted to frequent. So whether it be restaurants or any business in general. But that in itself would take the traffic off of 28, hopefully.
I know there was an issue before the zoning board, and this is before I had an opportunity to sit. I observed it. There's one property owner that was looking for some improvements on their property commercially. And the people who were sitting on the zoning board were asking for some of the curb cuts to be reduced. The owner very angrily withdrew his idea for his own improvements because he didn't want to lose his curb cuts. So it does come back.
Yeah, I recall we went back and forth with that new gas station on
Right.
28.
Right. The Cape Farm.
Country gas station, yeah, across from the condos. And we were kind of adamant in the fact that what we wanted, and that was the reduction of that one corner there because of the side street. And finally, they went along with it, but,
And it's worked out great.
yeah, it has.
That was a really good back and forth with the developer and came up, I think, with a superior site design. They needed to end up getting different type of relief, but the ZBA was very open to it because it did create a much better site design layout.
And in regards to an example of interior roads relative to businesses and establishments, if you know where Mill Road is, down by Doyle's,
Yep.
you can take a right or left in there, and you can go all the way through the parking lots down to D'Angelo's. And that's quite a distance. And how many businesses are in there? There's probably at least a half a dozen or more. Oh, probably 8 or 10.
And of all of our local shortcuts.
Exactly. Well, that's my coffee in the morning.
I mean, you do have like that shared driveway for where Mike's Roast Beef is and also the Dollar General, which is nice to have that. Yeah, it worked out good.
Jack Hines' professional building in Yarmouth Motel. They share one entrance,
Right.
and then they just go off right and left to their
That's true.
respective parking areas. Okay, now we beat that up.
It's hard, you know.
Well, if you're open-minded, keep thinking forward, it's bound to hit you where you're going to have to make decisions. And
If it makes you feel any better, I always comment on it during site plan review and design review committee usually comments on it as well. And typically, if somebody has to get a special permit through the ZBA, they're very good at listening to the site plan review and design review comments, and maybe to the detriment of a project owner. But we did end up reducing a curb cut on Route 28 for the Silver Cloud storage building. They didn't want to get rid of it, and they ended up not wanting to get rid of it because they weren't sure what would happen in the future, and they didn't want to lose their curb cut on Route 28, so they ended up leaving it to a certain point and then kind of like filling it in with grass and some plantings there. So even to that point, when they didn't need it, they had 2 on each side. They still wanted to keep their Route 28.
But ultimately, they did a great job
Oh, it
with the
looks-
building and everything
They
there.
decorated it great for
Yeah,
Christmas.
they
It looks
did.
great, yeah. Kudos to them, did a
You
good
bet.
job.
Okay. We on to meeting minutes?
I think we are on to meeting minutes.
Okay. Everyone have a chance to read the minutes? December 19th?
We don't have enough people, I don't think.
Enough people?
Brad's not here.
No?
Chris, Lee, and Tom weren't at the meeting.
Yeah, you didn't have 3 out of 4.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't,
Next time out of the chute.
yeah, if we can, it's good. I mean, if we have to out of necessity, that's one thing, but we don't really.
Yeah, we don't really have to do it out of necessity.
Yeah.
Board of Appeals agenda, decisions,
I send out anything I get.
you bet.
And
Committee updates, board members? No, we haven't met with the Housing Trust or the CPA. And we have a meeting coming up for the drive-in site, right, Monday?
on the 14th.
Okay.
What's going on with that drive-in site anyways? Are we,
What's going on at the drive-in? The drive-in committee is working on an interim use policy for different types of festivals and events. We also met with a bunch of different event sponsors to try and get a better idea of what they would need in the short term for improvements at the site and also for long term at the site. We did apply for a CPA grant for $3.7 million to pay for 100% of the design and permitting, and then 50% of the construction costs, so that we would have some seed money, some matching funds in order to look for other different types of grant opportunities. So if that moves forward at annual town meeting, we'll be looking for a consultant to start doing the designing and permitting on the Riverwalk Park and the Boardwalk Loop. The Board of Selectmen chose the loop.
When you say grant, where's the money coming from, the town?
Community Preservation Act funds, which is that surcharge on your taxes, the
Right.
3%.
Mr. Chairman, have anyone decided on a new name for the Riverwalk Park?
No, that's still up in the air. We've been
Yes.
talking about that.
I have a feeling you're thinking of something, but yeah, we were talking about maybe having a contest or something to help name the park in some way.
Park sounds pretty good. Everybody's throwing it around right now.
Well, I think everybody's looking for something catchy, something that'll stand out. But,
Tom Roach Walk?
there you go. Well, all depends on donations now. But
Put it in the register.
the Community Preservation Committee did approve the application, and there's one thing hanging the balance relative to the amount of funds available under recreation, and might have to use additional open space funds, approximately $800,000, to fulfill the amount requested. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Only if you were able to give me a quick answer. The Parkers River Bridge,
Yes.
where do we stand?
Okay. We've made a lot of progress on that. Right now, it's being reviewed. The second structural or the third structural and the third highway, I don't know how Mass DOT defines these things, but it's like the step right before the end is being reviewed at Mass DOT right now. They'll provide comments. The consultant will make those edits, and then it'll be the formal plans, specifications, and estimate, the PS&E that goes in. And we need to get approval from Mass DOT to get a Chapter 85 license because it's their bridge. We basically have all of our environmental permitting. We've done all the town-required land acquisitions and given it to Mass DOT. We are really hoping to go out to bid maybe April and open up and get the contractor started, fabrications and that type of thing, to start construction after Labor Day. So it's very tight, but that's where we are.
Thank you.
Can we get some idea from them relative to when they would start moving their equipment in?
Well, right now, with regard to the drive-in site, you
Sure.
mean? Yeah. Right now, there's nothing in the contract that allows them to use that. That would be something that we would negotiate with them. But they're going to need some place for storage and
Sure.
staging because there's not enough room in order to do that. And once we get a contractor on board, we can start talking about how much of an area they would need and talk about our needs for that site
Sure.
and be able to still have events and that type of thing.
Good. And Bass River Bridge? I noticed there's a backhoe, rubber tire backhoe, big backhoe down in that area with a lot of cones.
At the mill lane, the public parking lot?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I'm sorry, that's something a little bit different. That's not the Bass River Bridge, but the next project over, which is the Four Corners intersection. Because they're going to be doing some widening. It's going to be impacting the septic system for the Olympia House. So they're doing some perk tests on the town-owned land to see whether we could work in some way to allow them to have their disposal field on that, as well as some additional testing to see if we can do some drainage on that
But there's
town line.
no turning lanes proposed, or it's just for Olympia?
There's some widening, and there's going to be an additional shoulder, but on that particular section right there, no, I don't think there's any
I know the state was
additional.
talking about land taking there,
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's a very tight site, very small site. There's a lot of stuff going on in that building. For such a small building, there's a lot of stuff going on. So that's what that's related to.
Yeah, that whole area is real tight on the Four Corners. But the issue of the sewerage program also is there room to put the sewer pipes in?
That's something that Jeff is coordinating with the consultant, and as, not just the consultant for the Four Corners, but also the CDM, because they're going to, once we need to decide what we're doing, they need to do some design so that we can get that incorporated into the project. It'd be something that the town would have to pay for, but it's obviously be less expensive if we can incorporate it into that project.
Keep in mind, I think that pipe's got to go over the bridge.
Oh, yeah, the bridge is going to have, yeah, something attached on the side, force main.
Yeah.
Do you have a schedule on the Bass River Bridge now?
I do not, no.
The DOT website has got a lot of information on it, but they haven't, they're not in, they have not yet issued final design drawings.
Oh, God, no.
We had that preliminary
Right, and
They go
preliminary
in
hearing
increments,
just a little while ago.
25%, 50%, 75%.
they do, but we also want to meet with them before they got to the 25% in order to incorporate maybe some aesthetic improvements to make the bridge look a little bit nicer before they got too far. Well, yeah, in the bike lanes and that type of thing. Rich Bilski, who lives in town, works for Mass DOT, and he's doing a good job, I think, of keeping those types of things on the table for us. So he's a very big asset for the town. But just, like decorative lighting, the type of railing, whether there's impediments at the beginning to make the entrance look a little bit nicer, things like that. The last I'd heard from them is that they were still working on their the structure analysis, what the structure would look like, or as far, I can't forget what they call that, structural alternatives analysis. They said that their analysis wasn't going to change what the bridge looked like. It's just more of the details of how many piles you have, the frequency, and that type of structural analysis. But then we were going to get together and have some type of meeting to kind of talk about aesthetics, and I haven't heard anything from them. But I should reach out and find out what the status is on that.
The same for the intersection, Kath, we had a very preliminary meeting with them here, the consultants on the intersection. And several people raised some issues about, because of the new set of turning movements, there's a deterioration in the performance of that intersection, and they are expecting a deterioration.
Right.
And we had talked about maybe making Pleasant Street, as it comes out, not a one-way, have it two-way, but that's a town
Yes.
street.
Yes. Yep.
And then the other one was up by George Davis, squaring off that meet where Station Ave
Right.
and North Main
Yep.
come together.
Yep. They have not responded to those
Yeah,
comments at this
I hope they
time.
don't, it sounded to me, having listened to the people who were in the room, that leaving that alone made sense.
If you're ever in that intersection, and there's a tractor trailer coming out of Station Ave or West Main Street or North Main Street, trying to take a right onto 28, he's got to go way over into the center of the intersection to try and make the swing. So it would be difficult to try and take land away from that. You'd be into the foundation.
I think you're talking about the T intersection with Station Ave and
Yeah,
North
where
Main.
George Davis Builders is in the
Oh,
garden
yeah,
club.
but I'm just
Oh.
referring to Neil Bottomley's building, that big white building.
Yeah.
It has several apartments.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But there were several people who, anyway, how's the best way to keep up on both of those? Just to visit the DOT website? Do they give you guys regular updates?
The Bass River, the DOT website I found isn't always totally up to speed. And they don't necessarily have any details. There's a generic information. Let me see what I can find from Jeff on the Bass River, and I'll also get in touch with them with regard to the aesthetic part of the program there. And then I can also check back. I did, after that meeting, I did send to Jeff the summary of a bunch of, because a lot of the things had to do with town roads, which
Yeah.
the consultant wasn't going to decide. And I relayed that information to him, and I can check up with him on that. So I'll take a look and send something out.
Okay. Any more board member items, updates?
Just maybe a little bit on the wastewater. We're moving as fast as we can to develop this public information and getting ready to start putting together presentations Our consultant has provided us with some standard formatting that's been used in Dennis and Harwich, as far as handouts or mailers, and we're trying to bring this together because we're really in a tight time frame. We've got to put this whole public presentation information together and present it before the annual town meeting. At least that's the goal right now. It looks like, as far as major funding issues, we may not be requesting anything in this annual town meeting. We may be looking for a special town meeting in the fall.
Right, that's what I was thinking.
But there's, the big issue is whether or not, well, the big issue is trying to sell the program to the residents and give them assurances on what we're talking about for cost. Because the one big thing that's going to be on the annual town meeting will be the tri-town agreement and getting that approved. We also have another challenge here. We're trying to get the Board of Selectmen on board at some point to support the program. And I think we're planning to meet with them maybe the end of January. But we have a lot of work to do between now and then, and there's not a lot of time.
No. And one of the things that we talked about as well is how we're going to pay for it. And that's, we've got all kinds of educational projects, opportunities to, we really need the system. There's no two ways about it. We need wastewater. But we have to also look at alternative funding measures so it just doesn't kill our Yarmouth residents.
Well, I think a couple of good things that have been happening lately, like the governor signed the
Yep.
Airbnb.
That's an alternative measure.
That's one of them. Also, I think we're looking at how we're going to structure this thing to make it as easy as possible for the community to be able to afford this thing. Spreading the program over 40 years, I mean, I think it could be done in a shorter period of time, but I think from a planning point of view, and for not knowing all the pieces to the puzzle yet, using that period, that construction period of 40 years is a good one, because it tells people that this program is not going to happen overnight, and we're going to design a program on a cost and funding basis that is going to be affordable. And that's probably the most important thing.
It is, I agree. And I think that by going out 40 years, as you said, it will make it more available for people to understand the cost that's going to be put upon them based on where they live in town, what side of 28, and so on and so forth. But another thing, too, about going out 40 years is that as technology changes, you may have the opportunity to reassess what you've designed, and things might fall into place for a better system. So that's one of the main assets, as I see, going out 40 years. Not just
One of the things we're targeting that I think is important and will come out when we do the presentations, we're going to be going to individual organizations. We haven't selected all of the organizations, but we've identified many of the organizations that we need to bring our dog and pony show to. And probably the most important part of the program is Phase 1. It's broken up into 8 phases. Phase 1 attacks Route 28 as our first major. And that's sort of the backbone that's going to provide opportunity for the adjoining neighborhoods to tie in. But what we're trying to do is get commercial on board first. And some of our bigger wastewater producers, all the hotels, motels, and so forth. And what we're anticipating is, down the line, this may make Yarmouth extremely competitive in terms of drawing in a new hotel, motel, maybe pulling some of these properties together that are not being fully utilized. And we're kind of anticipating that development, which is really redevelopment, if you will generate additional revenue that will help pay for the program and reduce the costs even further.
The one problem with any big-ticket item, whether it be the school project, whether it be the sewer project, is that people think only of the big ticket, only the big number. And I think it should be made very clear that the amortization of the project on an annual basis is actually very small money compared to the big ticket, big number. And so if most people are going to say, well, how does that affect my tax bill? Now, if you said, well, you're going to have to afford $100,000 for each property. Well, they'd say, no, we don't want that project. But now if you said, well, no, you're only going to need to spend $50 extra for the next 10 years, that's an entirely different kind of way. And that amortization cost should be emphasized up front rather than the big number.
Okay. Correspondence?
Yeah, just whatever I send you.
Staff updates? You've done all that?
I've updated you as more than you need to know.
Upcoming meeting, January 16th?
Yep. We do have a public hearing for the renaming
I
of
saw that.
Dion Terrace to Laura's Way. I should say that. It's supposed to be a surprise for the wife. We're not going to be looking at, I had mentioned previously that Hawks Wing was looking to get some of their bond money back. I think they're going to try and finish things up and then come to us in March. So that won't be happening at the next meeting.
Any vacations that are upcoming? Funny you should ask, Tom.
Are you going on vacation, Tom?
I'll be going the 23rd.
Okay.
Yeah. South to go fishing.
But just January 20. We don't meet then anyway.
No?
We don't meet then
I
anyway.
don't know. Well, it's for a week. But, motion adjourned?
So moved.
Second? Second in favor? Aye.